my name is Christine O, and I am an assistant professor in the School of Nursing at UVic and a board member for Pacific Postpartum Support Society, a nonprofit that has been providing peer support to parents and families with young children for over 40 years in BC. Before I start, I want to acknowledge the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and that I am an uninvited Taiwanese settler who is grateful to be able to live, work, and play on this land. And I recognize that we each have an ongoing role to play in the journey towards reconciliation. I started the study of maternal anger in 2015 during my doctoral studies at UBC. And today I'm going to tell you about what I have learned about mom rage and why parents and families need better formal and informal supports. I'd like to paint a picture of what mom rage can look like. A few years ago, I interviewed Shannon, a mother of two, who told me the following story. She said, "So it was just before Christmas and my husband's work screwed up payroll. So the next 3 paychecks were going to be smaller and our budget was getting tighter because we were dealing with the mold in our basement. That weekend, we had just gotten out of the ER for Addie's high fever. That day, my husband had a late shift and it all went sideways after he left for work. I was alone with the kids, and Addie, the baby, had decided that napping was off the table, while Maria, my 3-year-old, was being super defiant and really mean and hitting and throwing things at me. She made a giant mess of the cat food, which took me forever to clean up. And then I discovered the kids had snuck off to play with the cat litter, at which point I lost it and yelled at them and yanked them into the bath." Shannon continued on to tell me, "I locked the cats in our bedroom and with their food and their litter box and started washing up the kids in the tub, telling them, 'You're not having a fun bath, you're having a clean bath. You're going to get clean and right into pajamas.' But then, feeling bad, I tried to salvage the day and said, 'Let's have a pajama and pizza party and order pizza.' So I ordered the pizza and then went to get my wallet from the locked bedroom where the cats were in order to pay the pizza guy. And as I was at the door of our locked bedroom, I saw that one of the cats was not in the bedroom and was yelling at me to get in because he was separated from his litter box and food." Shannon paused before she continued to say, "I was just trying to salvage the day, and it felt like a metaphor for my life. Like I am just trying to make things better, and there's always a locked door that I don't have the key to. The kids were crying and yelling at me, and then I panicked and I raged. I was shaking the door, like trying to get in. It wasn't working. And so I hip slammed it and broke part of the door." Shannon's story illustrates mom rage well, the buildup of triggers that lead to intense and often disproportionate reactions. During this talk, we will examine the origins of mom rage and consider mom rage as a manifestation of multifaceted maternal distress. I will also describe family, community, and policy-oriented solutions to reduce parental anger and distress. Anger is a universal emotion that is fascinating to me. Think about the last time you got angry and how you felt physically and mentally. You might have felt hot, perhaps shaky, felt your heart pounding or clenched your fist, and maybe like that you wanted to act out in anger. What makes us feel that way, and why do we get angry? Anger is a reaction to a perceived harm, perceived or actual harm, threat, injustice, or unfairness. Not being heard or listened to by others can also make one angry. Contrary to our collective social discomfort around anger as a destructive emotion, Anger actually has an important role to play in that it is an adaptive and action-oriented emotion. Anger serves to draw attention to distressing situations. It acts as a red flag for intolerable circumstances and can be used constructively to take control and to try to change a bad situation. Despite anger being a universal emotion, maternal anger has been a much neglected mood problem, and likely in large part because anger has been stigmatized for women as being unfeminine and not aligned with what we expect of mothers to be feeling when caring for their children. When I first started my doctoral studies in 2015, I can recall that Googling postpartum anger and postpartum rage led me to a handful of relevant search hits. Today, I am happy to report that attention to maternal anger has gained a bit more traction. For example, clinical psychologist Darcy Lockman delves into the inequalities of straight parenting relationships in which mothers take on twice as much domestic work and childcare compared with male partners, usually while juggling workplace responsibilities. And this can take a large emotional toll on mothers that may manifest as anger and rage. We know that mothers were particularly strained during the pandemic when they had to contend with working from home and homeschooling children. This was a time we had heard mothers talk about how they would gather in fields, parks, and parking lots in order to scream to vent pandemic and childcare related stress without enough supports. Minna Dubin, a journalist and writer, wrote a radical op-ed in the New York Times, The Rage That Mothers Don't Talk About. Dubin's book, Mom Rage, just came out this year and elaborates on the complexity of factors behind mom rage. One of the factors I study is the relationship between rage and postpartum depression. It is important to talk about maternal depression when considering mom rage. A Statistics Canada survey in 2019 found that almost 1 in 4 women experience symptoms of depression or anxiety after childbirth. This is a number that ballooned and doubled during the pandemic. We often call this postpartum depression, which is commonly used as an umbrella term to describe the constellation of mood disturbances such as depression, irritability, anxiety, and general distress after birth. I'm going to challenge the conventional way of thinking about postpartum mental illness and illustrate how it often unfolds. The American Psychiatric Association, via the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which has been called the Bible of Mental Health Diagnostic Criteria, describes depression, anxiety, and anger as 3 distinct illnesses, listed as major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and intermittent explosive disorder. In turn, this has influenced how we have thought about perinatal depression and anxiety as distinct and separate disorders or illnesses. When I say perinatal, I mean the time during pregnancy and up to a year after birth. However, as mental health clinicians and care providers see, and patients often describe themselves as experiencing a combination of depression, anxiety, and anger at different times throughout their course of mental illness. Although there is growing understanding that perinatal depression and anxiety are often intertwined, I argue that anger is the overlooked mood disorder that also needs to be considered. To give you a sense of how common intense anger is, Okuda and colleagues found a prevalence of 8.7% intense anger in 34,000 adults in the general community in the United States. Now, let's look at how common anger is in the perinatal timeframe. Although I started with looking at anger after birth, maternal anger actually has its origins in pregnancy for some. In a small pre-pandemic study of 140 women in Calgary, 14% of of women reported that they had moderate levels of anger during pregnancy. My collaborators and I are currently analyzing a large data set of people who became pregnant during the pandemic, a longitudinal study which follows these parents and their pandemic-born children for 4 years. From a preliminary analysis of this data set my team is working on, we have found that 11.4% of pregnant persons reported moderate to high levels of anger. When we look at maternal anger after birth, the rates of anger are even higher as women experience frustration related to the stressors and challenges of the transition to parenthood, often while coping with poor sleep and inadequate social supports. In my first pre-pandemic study of Canadian mothers with infants 6 to 12 months of age, I found the rate of postpartum anger was 31%. From the pregnancy during the pandemic cohort of pregnant persons who gave birth, to note, we haven't published this data yet, but we have found that 12 months after birth, 1 in 4 mothers reported moderate to high levels of anger. So now that we have a sense of how common this phenomenon is, you might be wondering what factors are associated with mom anger. First, we know that depression has a strong link to perinatal anger, with a few of our previous studies finding this association. Other mental health researchers have also found this connection outside of the perinatal timeframe. For instance, anger is often seen as a sign of depression for men. However, we are also finding that anger may indicate depression for women as well. Next, we are also finding a linkage between anger and anxiety, with participants who have higher levels of anger also more likely to have higher levels of anxiety. To illustrate that connection, you might think of the story Shannon told about how she broke down the door after panicking and then raging. Given that there is a robust connection between poor mental health and poor quality sleep, it comes as no surprise that parents who are getting up multiple times a night to tend to infants for months at a stretch may have higher levels of frustration and anger. We are more prone to irritability and anger when we have not slept well. We have also found that having more children in the household as being associated with higher levels of anger. This is understandable given that it can definitely be more challenging to meet more demands for attention, care, and resources, which can lead to feelings of being overwhelmed. We have also found that lower income and financial hardship has a relationship with anger. And this too is a finding from outside the perinatal timeframe. When you are struggling to make ends meet, it can be stressful, a condition that may give way to anger. Finally, in our preliminary analysis of the pregnancy during the pandemic data, we are finding a significant effect of couples' relationship satisfaction and level of social supports available on maternal anger. Next, let's look at some of the consequences of mom anger when we don't support parents and families. First, a mother's anger expression is often followed by feelings of guilt and shame. Mothers who are depressed, anxious, or angry have less capacity to be emotionally available to infants and children. For example, Field and colleagues found that during play interactions with their infants, depressed mothers who are also anxious or angry spent less time smiling, vocalizing, and game playing with their babies. Chronic anger can lead to more harsh parenting, and this can have intergenerational effects as children learn how to regulate emotion from their parents and copy how they regulate emotion. No surprise, chronic maternal anger is linked with lower relationship quality and conflicts with partners. A few studies have also found that anger paired with depression is a more intense experience that can last longer than depression by itself, which in turn has negative effects on children's overall social emotional development. So this begs the question of how we can support families to reduce distress. And when I say distress, I mean the combination of anger, depression, and/or anxiety that parents can experience. For parents who have had their own experiences of rage, for example, yelling and being harsh with children, and have felt the cycle of shame and guilt that follows afterwards, please don't beat yourself up. You are human and it is normal to err. And when we err, we can repair. This concept of rupture and repair is rooted in attachment theory, and the repair is crucial for building resilience, developing trust, and emotional regulation in children. You might think of rupture and repair as a cycle of connection, disconnection, and reconnection between parent and child. No parent is going to be the perfect parent with a child at all hours of the day. Imagine a child and a parent playing with toy blocks. Sometimes they might accidentally knock over what they've built. This is like a rupture, a small bump in their time together. Maybe the child gets upset because they didn't get something they wanted, or the parent becomes impatient. But instead of leaving the blocks scattered, the parent can take the lead to rebuild the connection. This is the repair part. They can talk, hug, or find a way to make things better. This back and forth of having upsets and then fixing them helps kids learn that even when things go wrong, they can be made right again. It teaches them that everyone makes mistakes, but we can always work to fix them. And this helps kids grow up trusting and understanding their feelings better. Along with rupture and repair, it's also time to assess what basic needs you may not have been able to meet. The term self-care has gotten a bit of a bad rap and has somehow been morphed into being about self-indulgence. However, it is actually about meeting basic needs rather than self-indulgence. We somehow expect mothers and parents to minimize or do without what all of us need to be healthy and well, such as eating properly, exercising, sleeping enough, and having time for ourselves and for meaningful pursuits. At the end of the day, parents are human and need these same fundamental things to function well. Reproductive mental health in BC uses the NESTS acronym to describe the self-care all parents need, such as nutrition, exercise, sleep, time for self, and rallying formal and informal supports. For parents who are feeling angry and depressed, there are good and effective therapies. Psychological and counseling therapies, also known as talk therapies, are considered the first-line treatment and are highly effective for mild to moderate depression. There are also medication options safe for use in pregnancy and during breastfeeding for treating perinatal mood disorders. Research has also found that parenting programs such as Nobody's Perfect and the Building Emotional Awareness and Mental Health program to be helpful for improving parent and family functioning. Some academics, such as Jennifer Hahn Holbrook, have questioned whether postpartum depression is a disease of modern civilization because we now reside in nuclear families with often little to no communal support. In our evolutionary past, people engaged in cooperative child rearing, where children were cared for not just by biological parents, but other group members to improve child survival. Mothers typically had assistance from neighbors, friends, grandparents, and siblings, whom would be considered alloparents. Alloparenting is the idea that multiple people, not just the biological parents, play an important role in children's overall growth and development. Much of what was a shared responsibility between several members of a group is often now singularly placed on one primary caregiver, many times mothers. This suggests that we need to share the workload of parenting. We weren't meant to parent by ourselves, such as in the context of a single stay-at-home parent. In modern day, childcare providers, teachers, friends, grandparents, and other family members can take on alloparenting roles. Fathers and partners often get left out of the conversation, but they have a critical role to play. Research shows that when dads are more involved and active with children, parents have stronger bonds with each other and with the children, and even have better sleep. There are 2 policy changes that would go hand in hand to better support parents with young children. Knowing that 1 in 4 to 5 women and 1 in 10 men experience significant distress during the perinatal timeframe, and that only a fraction of these parents actually receive treatment and support for perinatal mental illness. This comes with a heavy psychological and economic costs for parents, children, families, and in turn society. Thus, we need to implement a coordinated national strategy for perinatal mental health in Canada. This is a critical step towards ensuring that all parents are screened for perinatal mental illness and receive the level of support they need. We also need better paternity leave policies that do not take away from maternal leave and provide fair enough compensation so that dads and partners can actually take that time. This would not only promote gender equity and parenting responsibilities, but also enhance the overall well-being of families by fostering stronger bonds between fathers and children. Next, we need to intervene on a social cultural level. Compared to previous generations where children were generally expected to go outside and play unsupervised, nowadays more and more is expected of mothers, and this shift has been called intensive mothering and helicopter parenting. In actuality, time use surveys show that currently parents, mothers and fathers are spending more time with their children than ever before. Although this cartoon is an exaggeration of the differing standards we hold for mothers and fathers, today we certainly expect fathers to be involved parents. I think it is useful to illustrate that we need to let go of the sometimes Mount Everest-sized expectations we place on women when they become mothers. Finally, on a social level, anger is a sensitive topic, even more so than depression and anxiety. We often think of anger as being a destructive emotion, and it certainly can be if left unchecked and unmanaged. Moms are afraid to talk about their anger and reach out for support because there is fear of being thought of as an unfit parent. But we weren't meant to do the task of child rearing by ourselves and need to encourage all new parents to rally supports, create a village, or have the village come to them. We need to decrease the stigma around parents reaching out about their anger. In conclusion, chronic and intense anger is a red flag of distress in the perinatal timeframe. Chronic maternal anger has negative effects on family functioning and requires support to manage. And finally, families, clinicians, community organizations, and policymakers have important roles to play to reduce anger and distress. If you are a parent who has been experiencing anger, depression, and/or anxiety, please know that you're not alone. You can reach out for support. Make an appointment with your primary care provider or call the BC HealthLink 811 number to be connected with a registered nurse. There's also a 24/7 Canadian crisis line if you are in crisis and are having thoughts about self-harm. And if you find that the care provider you are talking with is not taking your concerns seriously, find another provider. You deserve someone who listens and can provide support and referrals. Pacific Postpartum Support Society offers excellent peer-based support through their phone, text lines, and in-person support groups, as well as online support groups for parents with children under 3 years of age. They also have a queer and trans support group and Indigenous parent circle. I'm glad you tuned in today. Thank you.